Okay, we're gonna go ahead and get started now. So thanks everybody who's coming to the event, both
Recording is
virtual.
on.
Oop. Thanks everybody who came to the event, both virtual and in person. We're really looking to the conversation. Dr. Mohamed Abdou is a scholar, organizer, and author of Islam and Anarchism. Before exiting the academy to become an independent scholar and writer, Dr. Abdou taught at Columbia, Cornell, the American University of Cairo, Queen's University, and the University of Toronto. Dr. Abdou was the only faculty organizer consistently working with Columbia students who launched the encampments and the occupation of Hens Hall. And he was fired on live TV during a congressional hearing for his vocal support of the resistance. His work is rooted in both his expansive research on race, religion, and social movements transnationally, as well as his on the ground experiences in organizing with the, forgive me, the Tien Ding Dinaga Mohawks, and the sister territories of Kanawake, Akwesasne, and Kan Kane Satake. During the standoff over Colberton Track, as well as the anti-war protests of Iraq and Afghanistan, the indigenous Zapatista movement in Chiapas, and the 2011 Egyptian Arab Spring uprisings. He is an interdisciplinary scholar of indigenous, Black, critical race, and Islamic studies, as well as anti-racist, feminist, gender, sexuality, women, decolonial, and post-colonial studies. His forthcoming books are entitled Quran of the Oppressed, to be released in 2027, Queer Muslims in the Sword, and An Islam That Hates America. Dr. Abdou is a student of the Muqama and writes about anti-colonial and decolonial resistance movements with a particular focus on the Mujahideen in Gaza. His Substack is entitled End Times. And yes, that is all of the introduction I have. Um, we can open it up to Dr. Abdou now, and he's gonna again be talking about kind of the convergences of Islam and revolution from below. But yeah, take it away. We can't hear you right now. You're muted right now.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. In the name of Allah, the most gracious, the most merciful. I'd like to start off as I usually do all events, and this becomes very important. For the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we do everything in the name of our in the name of Creator and in honor of Creator, because we are bound, Muslims are bound by a certain covenant. And so I do this particularly for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that anything that I say, share, write, and I usually start with prayer from the Quran. It's actually Moses' prayer in the Quran. We are a people that believe in our prophet, beloved prophet Moses, as we do honor Jesus. We have a chapter named the chapter of Miriam in honor of the mother of Isa, Jesus, peace be upon him. It's often forgotten that Judaism and Christianity are Eastern traditions before they were appropriated by the white Christian as well as white European Jew to manifest in the form of modern day Catholicism and Protestantism as well as Zionism. These are all products of the white man. Be it the Blood and Soil Crusader or the white European Zionist, they stolen our Eastern traditions. But the prayer is that of Moses when he was about to meet Pharaoh, accompanied with his brother Aaron. And look at the beauty of the Quran, this beloved book of mine, of Muslims, how it describes the prayer of a prophet that we believe. Allahumma shrah li sadri, O Creator, open thy breast, waysir li amri, and make my affairs, our affairs, easy. And undo the knot of my tongue. واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي, and undo the knot of my tongue such that what it is that I have to share with all of you reaches perhaps your minds, your hearts, your souls. We are in a war, a racial religious war since 1492, as I'll elucidate in a little while. But we are in a battle for hearts and minds and souls, certainly. This war was certainly is very much a continuation of a crusading war, 7 to 9, that Muslims have undergone and continue to undergo. But I'd like to also thank the blessed students, as well as the organizers at Virginia Tech, who have managed to for their kind invitation. I'm deeply humbled and honored. I truly am. And I hope that, inshallah, this benefits, inshallah, our mutual and collective struggles. And I wish I was there in person, but circumstances are what they are. And I hope, inshallah, that I'll alleviate that soon enough, and that I will be in your midst, inshallah. That said, I'd like to also pay my respects, because this is the reality of the matter, and it has to do with the context of which what I'm about to share or speak to today. As far as Islam and revolution, forgive me, I'll speak for about an hour or maybe an hour and 15 minutes. But like I said, hopefully it'll be beneficial, and then we'll open it up to Q&A. But the reality of the matter is that we, ostensibly, had I been there, are sitting on Tutelo Monacan land. And this Virginia Tech, let alone Virginia, but particularly Virginia Tech, has benefited and is a land grab university. It benefited from the Morrell Grant Act of 1862 and the forced removal of indigenous nations from the Western territories. Now, in the context of Virginia, we're talking about 300,000 acres. And the Morrell Act has dispossessed indigenous people of 10.7 in total million acres. And Virginia Tech is, Cornell, that I worked for, was another land grab university, and it is the largest land grab university with over 1 million acres of stolen land, right? That stretches all the way from so-called New York all the way to California. But anyways, Virginia has stole over 300,000, right? And you're talking about, or we are talking about, land that has dispossessed 250, I'll say that a third time, 250 indigenous nations, right? Broken treaties, seizures, but this is part of the legacy, right? And we're talking about, just so that we're quantifying matters in terms of material dollar and cents, 10 million in past terms, but we're talking about the equivalent of $500 million, okay? In modern day terms, modern day numbers, right? So 52 institutions have stolen the equivalent of $500 million in today's terms, right? Of over 10.7 million acres of indigenous lands, right? And dispossessed at least 250 indigenous nations, right? Now, of course, the Virginia Tech, right, Southwest Center in Abingdon is located on Cherokee lands. The Virginia Tech Newport News Center is located on Nanisimon lands. And again, to put things into context, right? We're talking about indigenous nations that have signed, well, at least officially acknowledged 374 treaties with the so-called United States of America between 1778 and 1871. But we're really also talking about over 500 agreements between, none of which were upheld by what is referred to as the American government, the United States of America. But anyways, part of Virginia Tech's affiliation is also the Reynolds Homestead in Critz, which is located on Monacan, Saponi, as well as Okanichi lands. And, you know, I'm sure you all, perhaps the audience online is not aware of this, but you all that are attending this institution that has stolen this land. The Reynolds Homestead is once known as, should continue to be known, it is that, the Rock Spring Plantation, which is the birthplace of tobacco magnate farm that belonged to R.J. Reynolds as well as his brother A.D. Reynolds. And of course, this plantation still or acts as a cemetery for our indentured Black siblings who were enslaved on it, who were considered deemed property by the white man, by the white Christian man. Again, all this will be placed in the context if it's not obvious as to why I'm saying this. In this settler colony that proclaims itself a democracy, because this is what we're contending with, right? History, right? And a certain accounting. But anyways, on this plantation in the cemetery is over 60 graves of our Black siblings, mostly that are marked with fieldstones. The plantation held 45 Africans at this rock spring, as well as on adjacent properties, the Reynolds adjacent properties, right? And there were close to, at least by account, from my understanding, 88 people who were freed from captivity in 1863. So again, this is Virginia Tech. This is the context of which we're speaking. 300,000 acres of stolen land, a revenue raised of 285,000 from, in terms of interest from this land. This is the context, right? Now, the title of today's talk, alhamdulillah, is Islam and Revolution. I'd like to start off by speaking, given the context of that I just spoke to, land theft, enslavement, ongoing genocide of indigenous and Black people, right, of jihad. I've been reading Abu Ubaida's thesis this past while, and particularly Abu Ubaida is the speaker of the Al-Qassam brigades, the military wing of Hamas. And he wrote a thesis on the significance of Jerusalem and Palestine to Christians, to Jews, and to Muslims. And why it is incumbent upon Muslims, to engage in jihad, since the Crusader enemy, the Romans, Euro-America, as well as the Zionist entity, or Zionists, are engaged in an all-out war against Muslims, which is part of the ongoing crusades, to seize Jerusalem, to steal and thieve Palestine for their own ulterior motivations. Right now, you have the blood and soil crusaders that certainly want Palestine for their own ulterior motivations. They want to bring on the rapture, right? And we see people like Mike Huckabee, of course, cheer on Zionists and the Zionist land grabs. But of course, we all know that these crusaders dislike and are not doing it because they love Zionists. They hate Jewish people. But rather, they're doing it for their own ulterior motivations. And we know that Zionists at the same time are carrying out their own motivations. Insofar as wanting to build a third temple and so far as wanting to usher in the Messiah. But right now, they share mutually intersecting interests insofar as this enemy. So let's not be fooled as well. I mean, the split and divergence within MAGA that we're seeing insofar as Tucker Carlson and Candace Owens and Nick Fuentes, engaging in anti-Semitism, mind you. But again, this myth that Israel is in control of America is quite ludicrous, given America's imperialist history and its settler colonial history since 1492, right? And I can sit down and talk about, and I will sit down and talk about as to why 1492 is very important, because the war that America is launching on Iran within the broader region, West Asia, let alone that it has waged on the world, imperialism, vis-a-vis imperialism, could not happen without the engine fuel that is settler colonialism. If people are actually contending with the fact that they live in a settler colony as opposed to a democracy, that settler colonialism is a structure, that America is a Christian nation based on manifest destiny and doctrines of discovery, terra nullius, these are all religious doctrines, this was empty land, we did not engage, supposedly this is the myth that America tries to hide, that didn't engage in a genocide of over 100 million people. They didn't enslave millions upon millions of Black people from Africa, a third to a fifth for Muslims from the Iberian Peninsula, the west coast of Africa. So there's the line of Islam continuously there. Islamophobia is the backbone to the settler colony. But that's the point, that it was never a democracy. There's no such thing as secularism. In God we trust, on the dollar bill. Book America is based on Protestant conceptualizations of private property, on Victorian notions of gender and sexuality. Trump merely exposed what America always was and will continue to be. He called it himself, not in this past election, the election before, when he was questioned with regards to Vladimir Putin, and he says, well, what do you think? We're a nation of killers. Good. I'm glad that you admit that you are a nation of killers, because that's always what you have been and always what you will continue to be. But nonetheless, this is, again, the context of which we are speaking, a settler colonial America. And if settler immigrants in the context of this place called Virginia, let alone anywhere else in America, had actually confronted the larger monster of America, the fact that America is leading this war on Islam, on Muslims, that it is using Jews, using Zionism, as Zionists are trying to use the US, definitely, but rather Zionism is based and is modeled on the American entity. The American entity exists since 1492. Like I said, it's a settler colony, settler colonialism in a structure. 1492 instituted structure. 1492 isn't an event. So I'm not going to sit down and blame this Zionist settler colony that inshallah won't reach its 80th birthday, when I haven't confronted this American entity that is about to celebrate, well, it's more than 250 years, but is about to celebrate its 250th anniversary. I don't think it should see its 250th anniversary, but that is the point. If settler immigrants actually contended with the fact that America is the larger monster, that it is leading this war on Islam and Muslims, let alone the globe, Zionism would not exist. As the Blessed General Sinwar said after October 7th, the blessed day of Al-Aqsa flood, 2023, that we defeated the Zionist entity. Now we fight the American and the British military. We have yet to see, again, people in America confront the fact that they live in this settler colony. I'm reading Abu Ubaidah, and I'm reading what he's writing about jihad, and against this Crusader Zionist entity, and Arab normalizers too, of course. And I'm sitting down and I'm reading, and for those, again, Zionists that may be joining us, let alone those blood and soil white supremacists that made a huge event out of the fact that I was speaking a little bit further down south than on the elite Zionist coasts, so far as New York or California. I guess I hit the plantation right where I'm supposed to, and that ruffled a little bit of their feathers. But anyways, just so that we're clear, there are many forms of jihad. There is the jihad of the heart, that is referred to as jihad al-qalb. There's jihad of the tongue, jihad al-lisan. Jihad of the qalb and jihad al-lisan is to be mindful of what one says, to be respectful. And even if one is to engage into disagreement, one is to engage in a disagreement, as the Quran says, وَجَادِلْهُمْ بِالَّتِي هِيَ أَحْسَنُ, debate with them with that which is better, based on one's thought, based on one's intellect, based on history. And the jihad of the heart is to fight one's inner microfascisms, one's own prejudices against the poor, against against anything that would oppress women, children, the elderly. After all, that is Islam. It is a fight for justice. It is a fight for those that belong to the below, the meek, the dispossessed, to the salt of the earth, those who are oppressed. That is what Islam stands for. So there's also the jihad that invites believers to misconceptualizations, particularly with regards to Islam, this beautiful tradition, to engage in a mental revolution, to engage in the greater jihads, like I said, the fight against one's own inner microfascisms. After all, we've internalized fascisms of all kinds, the individualism that comes with capitalism, the selfishness, the materialism. We critique the elites that exist within society, but we aspire to be elites in our own rights. We covet, again, and we worship the dollar bill. Capitalism has developed itself as its own master, its own god. We revere capitalism for 9-to-5 jobs and so on and so forth. But also the state, we've deified the state. The state has crowned itself as God, and in the place of God, denying true God. So yeah, we worship these entities. We worship the so-called American flag that we're supposed to pledge allegiance to. But you can't worship two masters. You can't worship God while at the same time worship this other God that demands that you kill, that you conscript black and brown people to go kill and civilize black and brown people elsewhere all across the globe in the name of women's rights and queer rights and this rights and that rights of freedom of democracy when you don't even have freedom and democracy in your own quote unquote home. That is again a settler colony based on stolen land. So there are many forms of jihad. There's the jihad the jihad of the hand, in a certain sense that when you see injustice, the least of which you are supposed to act and stop it with your hand. If you can't, then you stop it with your tongue. If you can't, then you stop it with your heart. There are many forms of jihad. Jihad means to literally to struggle against tyrannical systems, to institute just orders, to defend, again, life. To defend life if need be, yes, using the sword, but the actual word to fight, to struggle in that sense of the sword is not jihad, as ignorant folks, as white folks tend to propagate, as Muslims, colonized Muslims, have even internalized, because the actual word for fighting, we're going to battle, is qital. That is the actual word. So not all forms of jihad are qital, and not all forms of qital are jihad. So that is an important distinction. But anyways, jihad is an important act because a revolution involves practical questions. As somebody who has lived the uprising, the Arab Spring, who has witnessed the Black Spring, who has witnessed No Dakota, I Don't Know More, the struggle for, and who has been a part of indigenous struggles since I became a settler on stolen land in 1997. When I moved to Turtle Island, and I am a settler because although I don't enjoy the same privileges as the white man, that doesn't mean that I'm not complicit, again, in indigenous dispossession and the ongoing genocide of indigenous people, as well as my black siblings. This is not my land and it will never be mine. That is part of the reality. The only people who are not settlers in the context of Turtle Island are indigenous people and descendants of the Middle Passage of the transatlantic slave trade because they did not have a choice. And of course, white settler colonialism has traced our relations because it pitted indigenous against black and black against indigenous. Indigenous people were involved, sadly, in certain occasions and certain tribes, even in certain families, in the enslavement of black people, and black people were conscripted towards indigenous extermination. This is the project of white supremacy. And 1492 becomes a very important marker in that year because these Zionists, this modern construct of the Judeo-Christian ethos where, we share a similar civilizational trajectory, is such a sham because anybody who studied history understands that in 1492, Muslims and Jews, yes, you Jews, were labeled as both savages and heathens, and we were murdered and raped and persecuted by Ferdinand and Isabel, by crusaders. After all, also Columbus was a crusader, but we were labeled savages and heathens, savage being the racial marker, heathen being the religious marker. Okay, so you can't understand race without religion. This is why I continue to say this is a racial and religious war. Anyways, so we're labeled savages and heathens. Columbus goes to Ferdinand and Isabel and says, well, I have my eyes on Jerusalem. We need to liberate it from Muslims. And Ferdinand and Isabel granted permission, and instead of going to India, he miscalculates the radius of the Earth, the diameter of the Earth. Of course, Europe, for a great deal of its history, thought that the Earth was flat, while we had long determined that the Earth was round. But anyways, he miscalculates and relies on Muslim geographers, but nonetheless, he misreads and misinterprets, like geographers like Al-Faranjis, for instance, and he misinterprets their scientific calculations, and he ends up on the shore of the Caribbean, where he meets Taino people and he refers to them as savages and heathens. Later, in his diaries and Hernan Cortez's diaries, they not only refer to indigenous people as savage and heathens, specifically in the case of Cortez, he comes and names Aztec women as Moorish women, Aztec temples are Moorish mosques, Aztec women are Moorish women. Sorry, he referred to Montezuma as the Aztec leader as a sultan, right? Even two-spirit people gender non-conforming indigenous people were referred to as berdach, which is the term that was cast on gender non-conforming Muslims. Right. This is the degree in which the new world was being built on the old. This is the importance of 1492. And like I said, after the white man that appropriated Christianity, especially underneath Constantine, who appropriated Christianity underneath his deathbed and weaponized it as an imperial tool of conquest, after they genocided over 100 million people, indigenous people, they engaged in transatlantic slavery. And like I said, a third to fifth of the transatlantic slaves or black siblings were Muslims from the Iberian Peninsula. Now, this is then the context and the full scope of what we're talking about insofar as Palestine. This is what led Palestine was important now. Palestine is important then and is important now. 1492 then ushered that world of nation states, settler colonial states, as well as capitalism. These are modern European, your American conceptualizations with regards to governance and with regards to economic orders. Okay. Before that, there were alternative conceptualizations of sovereignty beyond the nation state, definitely, for Black, Indigenous, and people of color traditions, a point that I'm going to get to later in the discussion. But over these past 2 decades, and we're talking about the context of revolution, and I have been a part, as I was saying, of revolution. Revolution is about practical questions. What are you going to do with a nuclear power plant? What are you going to do with the army? What are you going to do with the military? People are sitting down and talking about dismantling capitalism. Tell me, in what world are you going to deal with, particularly anti-imperialist Marxists or even anarchists? We're going to destroy the state. We're going to destroy capitalism. We're going to dismantle this, dismantle that. In what world are you going to dismantle, let alone take over the prison, the pharmaceutical, the military, the agrochemical industrial complexes? Are you insane? But this is the challenge, and this is the battle of language. Language is imbued with power. Divesting, I understand, dismantling. In what world are you going to dismantle capitalism? Now, you go to Wegmans and you buy your groceries, but most people, particularly leftists, and liberals are not leftists. This is part of the irony and the inanity of politics insofar as the US. Most people think that liberals are leftists, which is to me rather absurd, or anybody who's actually done their study rather absurd. Liberals are not leftist. Liberalism has affected both the left and the right. It affected the left in terms of an internalized Islamophobia and individualism and a reliance on the nation state as a tool of liberation. And it affected certainly the right, because the right is capitalist certainly as well, even if they tend to be more critical of the state, ironically. But the left and right are not this opposite side spectrum, but rather exist along a circle that way. Liberalism comes out of the Enlightenment project that tried to kill God and crowned itself as demagogue in a certain sense. But liberalism and secularism rely on a Christian ethos. Like I said, manifest destiny, doctrines of discovery, terra nullius, and so on. These are religious doctrines. But anyways, to go back to the point. So revolutions involve practical questions, right? They, as the Quran says, involve a transformation of our way of being. If I develop my own ways of living on the land, if I learn to grow my own food, do I need to shop at Wegmans anymore? Absolutely not. I learn to empower myself and to empower my community and my family, and my neighbors, and so on and so forth. We learn to grow food together on the land. I no longer need to shop at Wegmans. If I identify the fact that this is a settler colony and I no longer vote, since voting isn't a form of harm reduction on stolen land, then I've divested from the settler state. 50%, if not more, of the American citizenship population, anyways, does not vote. This is a degree of disillusionment with regards to politics. There's so much for democracy. This is the facade. This is the lie that the average American citizen who buys into the settler dream, particularly and including immigrant, again, Muslim settlers, Arab settlers, South Asian settlers, all kinds of settlers, who move into this colony, this death colony, and who buy into progress and upward mobility and assimilation and want to hyphenate their name, participate in. You're participating, even if you're pro-Palestinian, the genocide of people both within the settler colony as well as abroad in the context of Palestine that you care about. Because when you buy into hyphenated citizen identity, it's ironic. Like I always say, the Arab, they always have the Arab American, the queer American, the this American, the that American. They all hyphenate their names, the Asian American, everybody hyphenates their names, except the white American because they're assumed to be the native of the land. Indigenous people are only remembered when their names are on tomahawk or weapons of mass destruction like tomahawk missiles or Apache helicopters or football teams, the Washington Redskins or this or that or the Chiefs. This is the irony. This is the original sin that is constantly being erased. This is what our mujahideen on October 7th in the Blessed Tufan al-Aqsa sought to change. Because not only do they take Islam at their compass, they do not, and they are not sitting down and quoting Marx, Lenin, and Fanon, and Mao. And of course, I write on the intersections between leftist politics and Islam, particularly from an anarchist lens, since I find that anarchism is more suitable in relationship to Islam than Marxism. Anarchists are Marxists too, but anarchists are quite critical of power, and sovereignty in Islam lies in the Ummah, and the Ummah is an anti-statist concept. So I don't believe ultimately that the state can be an instrument of liberation. But nonetheless, the mujahideen that embody an Islam of the below, an Islam of the below to the left in Gaza, who do not quote, as I said, Marx and Lenin and Fanon, they involved revolutionary new forms of being in the world by transforming themselves as well as their environment. Because Allah says in the Quran, in Allah, God does not change the people until they change themselves. Until they change themselves. So revolutions are about transforming the way that we eat, the way that we breathe, the way that we walk with the land, not on the land, the way that we walk with the land, the way that we live. It is the earth that is a subject that gives us the very air that we breathe and the very food that we eat. The earth is not an object, it's not an anthropomorphic object. That's another thing I take issue insofar as Marxism, general conceptualizations of Marxism. The earth is a subject, and the Quran names many chapters after non-human life. The chapter of the moon, the chapter of the sun, the chapter of the bees, the chapter of the thunder. This is our reverence for creation that we are an extension of, and that are an extension of creator. So they transformed themselves as well as transformed their environment because they created a culture of resistance. There's many and much that one can say about the Blessed Tufan al-Aqsa, let alone lessons from Tufan al-Aqsa that were not learned, that were not heeded during the so-called Arab Spring, because we lacked a vision, we lacked a strategy. There's a difference between strategy and tactic. People, majority in the Arab Spring were in North Dakota and blacks, and with regards to the Black Spring, did not know what they are fighting against for the most part, let alone what they are fighting for. Because you can't have indigenous or black liberation without each other in the context of Turtle Islands. And you can't have that without consideration also for Africa. Africa is the size of the US and Canada, let alone East and West Europe, let alone China and Japan. That is how big Africa is. So how can you have Black Lives Mattering in the context of this death colony called the US without considering Africa and the context of the colonization and imperialism of Africa? For Europe to survive and to thrive, as the ex-French president Mitterrand had said, Africa has to die. So you rely on the death of Africa, you exceptionalize yourself in everything that you do, and you refuse to deal with the larger monster in the mirror. You want to liberate Palestine, but you don't want to deal with the death colony where you're at, with the head of the snake. This is the irony. This is why jihad becomes important. This is why the confrontation and the learning from the Blessed Tufan al-Aqsa become vital, and from the kind of revolutionary Islam that the Mujahideen espouse. Like I said, the Mujahideen engaged in the greater jihad of themselves, humble people. They defended and they center themselves on the poor, women, elderly, children. That is their Islam. They did not vie and they do not vie to fit into the world of the above. They're not negotiating and not fighting for a Palestinian state. They don't, and they broke the idea of international law and human rights. They don't believe in the idea of mediocrity, which they completely destroyed in the Blessed Tufan al-Aqsa, because they showed that that world of the above that was built out of the fodder of the white man, and the white man's conceptualization of the world, was all a facade. So you can quote Francesca Albanese all you want. You could quote international law, the right for anti-colonial resistance, but we don't need any of these orders in order to argue for the fact, let alone to take action insofar as defending our lands and our peoples and our way of life. Islam, that means willful surrender, not submission, matters that way. Anarchism does not mean chaos and anarchy. It's very ironic that people who speak English or can only speak English, Americans proclaim themselves to be in the most civilized country in the world, the wealthiest country in the world, yet they don't even have access to healthcare, let alone a proper education. They don't even understand their own language, that even a brown person like myself probably understands that language, that colonial language, more than most of them. Anarchy doesn't mean, again, chaos. It means the disordered order. It means organizing in anti-authoritarian ways. It does not mean chaos. The word for it in Arabic is la sultawiyya, not fawdawi. Fawdawiyya means chaos and anarchy, and of course, Arab dictators, governments often mistranslate it that way because they've also internalized the ways of the white man, etc. But the actual word, the proper translation, is la sultawiyya. Islam comes from the root salama, which is to deliver, salam, also peace, right? Falls between, and this becomes very, very important, right? If you actually translate it into submission, which is the mistranslation of wrong translation, the word for submission in Arabic is khudu', which is a completely different word. Again, this is part of the ignorance of both Muslims, and shame on us first, but also of the white man, who use the word submission to give the illusion that Muslims don't think and don't reflect, and despite the fact that the Quran uses terms, أَلَا يَتَفَكَّرُونَ أَلَا يَعْقِلُونَ أَلَا يَعْلَمُونَ, do they not think that they are correct? Do they not know? But here again it becomes, and we return to the point of jihad and resistance. And resistance, again, can be reactionary. It is or it's similar to anti-colonialism. It's being against something, against a colonial power. But my people, as I say, and this is why we need to distinguish, my people deserve, our people, Black, Indigenous, and people of color, people, Muslims, deserve to engage in a logic of liberation. Liberation is an active stance. Decolonization is an active stance because it means that we not only know what we're fighting against. Is it just capitalism? Is it capitalism and the nation state? Given the fact that you can't separate capitalism from the nation state because they historically developed together, and though they may show short-term animosities, their long-term strategic interests are one and the same. Or is it both? And in that particular case and scenario, it becomes important to learn, okay, not only what are we fighting against, what are we fighting for? And this was the problem in the Arab Spring. This was the problem in North Dakota. We never know what we're fighting for. Occupy Wall Street. Well, what are you already occupying when you're occupying stolen land? BDS. Let's get Virginia Tech. Let's get CUNY. Let's get all these settler institutions, these academic institutions that engaged in land grab or are real estate corporations, like in the case of NYU, or land grab like Cornell or Virginia Tech, etc., to divest from BDS. How? The BDS is a tactic, it's not a strategy. What does that mean? BDS or these institutions are an extension of the settler state, and then we're surprised that they would shut down the encampments, that they would condemn, that they would expel you, all the students who are regarded as a branch of the Mujahideen. So bless you for what you did. And that is why you were named a branch of the resistance by the Muqawma, by the most honorable people on earth. A branch of the resistance. They did not call the workers, and today's May Day, they did not call the workers a branch of the resistance, nor the doctors, nor the engineers, nor the dock workers, nor the nurses. They don't call on you. They called you, the students, a branch of the resistance. You're the youth. You're what Mohamed Abdou Jamal referred to are what come from immortality, and you're the arrows that we shoot towards infinity. You're what provide an imaginary horizon. The reason that you were such a threat in the encampment is because you showed an alternative. You opened up a portal of imagination to a different futurity, to a different way of life, a different way of life, in which you can breathe differently, eat differently. You learn more in the encampment than you did in your own individual classrooms. These institutions are based on the compartmentalization of knowledge. Physics is separate from chemistry, separate from political science, from biology, from gender studies, from sociology, from it's an entire spectrum by which the white man had devised and created a hierarchical system that subscribes to the world of the above, a hierarchical order, a vertical order, in which you have to jump through hoops from undergrad to graduate school, and then you enter into the academic field where you are getting into a tenure track job, and then you have to jump through hoops and keep your mouth shut with regard to certain topics that are deemed exceptional in order to get tenure, and then you become a part of the machina, a cog of the obey, repeat, consume. You have to pay rent, you have to take your children to school and put gas and oil in your car. You're a cog, nothing more. And then you die. Maybe if you're lucky, you get to sit on a porch, drink lemonade, and watch your children play on the swings. If you're lucky. But that's the order. And is that the purpose of life? Because in Islam, we operate according to a different cosmology, different way of seeing and living them. And the same thing, by the way, with our Black radical traditions, when we look at folks like Kwame Ture, Rama, Sankara, Patrice Lumumba, all who were assassinated by imperialism, by the so-called US, our Black revolutionaries, the destruction of the Black Panthers, but also our indigenous ancestors, leaders. We have a different way of life, a different way of learning that is interdisciplinary, that is horizontal, that is lateral. The Quran hence says and asks us an existential question about why we're born into this world, why we live, what our purpose is. And the Quran says in chapter of the women, you don't have a chapter of the men, by the way, in the Quran. This is how much women are held in such esteemed honor. Chapter 4, verse 95. But Islam is always deemed sexist, exceptionally sexist and misogynist and so on and so forth, right? Look at the ironies of the world in which we live. But anyways, and not that we don't claim the patriarchy, unfortunately, or sadly we do. And again, that's our own fault as Muslims. But those believers, the verse goes, those believers who sit at home unless they do so out of a disabling injury are not the equals of those who strive in the way of Allah, with their possession and their lives. Allah has exalted and ranked those who strive with their possessions and their lives over those who sit at home. And though to each Allah has promised some good reward, He has preferred those who strive in the way of Allah over those who sit at home for a mighty reward. To defend the defenseless, to defend the earth, one's homeland, one's people, to defend justice, more important than any of that. Say, if your fathers, your sons, your brothers, your wives, your tribes, the property that you have acquired, the merchandise you fear will not be sold, the homes that you love are dear to you, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, His messenger, and struggling for His way, then wait until Allah shall bring His command. Chapter of the repentance, Surah At-Tawbah, verse 24, chapter. You see, we're not people that are afraid to die. We're afraid to die having been seduced by the materialism of the world, having been sucked into it, having been obsessed with this world, that it has a chokehold. The same way that this university gaslights you, shackles you, strangulates you, you don't know what it is to live in a prison. We're all born in a cage in a prison. We're just given the illusion of freedom and democracy, the veneer. But it's that same university, it's the same world that the white man creates, that tone polices you, that suffocates you, that rules, that cajoles you, and us into mechanisms and apparatuses and institutions and laws and paradigms that end up going nowhere. And so here's the question. And again, you have an ongoing genocide where you are at. The apocalypse is happening. This is an end times religious racial war. I've been saying since 1492, and it's unfolding. And even if you don't believe in religion, you'd be very naive as an activist or as an organizer to ignore the fact that billions of people do, and the fact that there are religious prophecies that are coming to the fore. So you have to act. But the question is, what kind of actions? Because mobilizing is not organizing. Kwame Ture had said, mobilizing is about issues. Organizing is about structures. And so my issue with a lot of anti-imperialist Marxists and anarchists, etc., within the settler colony, within the imperial core, is that they sit down and talk about imperialism and sovereignty and so on and so forth. And they clap for Iran that is dropping bombs on Tel Aviv and Haifa. They clap for Mujahideen in Gaza. But they won't actively do anything, despite the fact that the majority of them are immigrant settlers on stolen land, with regards to the fact that they are settlers on stolen land, that they are Zionists on stolen lands, where they are, be they academics, be they organizers, be they first or second generation. They won't even acknowledge the relationship between settler colonialism that acts as the engine of imperialism. You want to stop imperialism, you would think that you'd be confronting settler colonialism back home. What have you done for indigenous sovereignty? What have you done for Black self-determination? Because the moment that you buy and call yourself an American or Canadian, and you buy that suburban home and house, and that's all you invest for, invest in your academic, and you invest in these prestigious careers, and you're sitting down and writing papers and saying fancy language and using fancy terms or things that you don't need to get fancy about or complicated about, just so that you could seem smart. You have invested in the world of the above. How have you gotten your hands dirty with the below? Have you been a part of standoffs? Have you sat down around the campfire and actually spoken to indigenous people? Have you grown food with them? You talk about the earth and you value it. But this is the irony. You won't do anything. You won't block ports. You won't engage in Palestine actions. You won't look at the Black Panthers from a critical perspective as a source of inspiration. What did the Panthers do? They created the breakfast programs. That's what made them terrorists in the eyes of Hoover and the FBI. They armed themselves. They didn't want to assimilate into the American dream. They wanted to destroy it. But you want to have your cake and eat it too. Well, how does that work? And so you won't do anything to intervene for women and children abroad, Black and brown women elsewhere. You won't do anything to intervene to protect women and children where you are at, where a genocide is ongoing. You won't halt the weapons industry. You won't destroy locally where you are at. Instead, people are participating in the case of, look at New York and Mamdani, look at the case of what's happening in California and the governorship there. Voting is a form of harm reduction. Change the operator and somehow the system will change. You know, the system that we're dealing with structures, the system doesn't change because you change the operator. This is about organizing, and organizing is hard, and you got to organize with the people on whose lands, the stolen lands, you live on. So instead of preaching democracy and authoritarianism and regime change this and look at the authoritarianism over there, we're going to confront the authoritarianism that exists in the very bosom of your household. Deal with the very dirt of your home, this place you call home. You can't even defend yourselves in the face of totalitarianism, in the face of ICE. You can't even establish sustainable mutual aid networks across state lines. Land back isn't going to happen because you're tweeting about it and you're Facebooking about it. Land back means being on the land with the people whose lands it's stolen. But as it broke the world, and we're living on hers, there is no post as the world. And like I said, our Mujahideen teach and belong to a Quran of the oppressed and the resistance and Islam of the belong. And they have sacrificed many Amuns that have become martyrs as a part of this flood on the way to Jerusalem. Jerusalem is what stole and steals our hearts, sets it aflame. It is the tongue of fire. And so, contrary and juxtaposed to that, you have, and particularly I speak to Muslims now, a subdued, a slumbering sons of Islam that are residing in the shade of comfortable safety, that who want to pursue this life, liberty, and happiness. Look at Mahmoud Mamdani. He's an example, or Zohran Mamdani. He's an example, a beacon of light, the promise of America fulfilled. Him as the Uncle Tom Obama before him. The Obama that is of a winning smile and a good set of speechwriters, Wall Street Obama, drone President Obama. But this is Mamdani, who reneged on Black Lives Matter, on defund the police, who does not miss an opportunity to diss the Mujahideen of Gaza, to diss Hamas, to condemn them, yet he won't condemn the sale of Palestinian land from synagogues in so-called New York on Lenin and Lenape territory. He won't even deal with the fact that he's a settler on stolen land. These are the false promises. Again, it was always a nightmare, as Malcolm called it. It was never a dream. And these dreams come at the heaviest exacted price, which is of Muslim blood, of black, indigenous, and people of color blood. It's very important to realize, and again, I'm here to introduce a little bit of reality, or to remind us, to remind me, because I'm here with you the second. I may not be in that word, and that is part of the reality, right? That the heaviest judgment, whether we believe it or not, awaits within our burial graves when we lay low. And that moment, for me, as for all of us, we don't know when it will come, but it certainly draws near and near with every breath that we take, with the passing of the sun's rotating turns, with the turning and the spinning wheel of the clock's hours in its hands. And a Muslim, at least supposedly, and this is what we learn from the Islam of the resistance, we're not supposed to be captives to this garrison of earth's blinding allure, because as the Quran described, we created this world lahun wa mata'. Within it is enjoyment. وَمَا الْمَالُ وَالْبَنُونَ إِلَّا زِينَةُ الْحَيَاةِ الدُّنْيَا. And women and children and ornaments and wealth, are nothing but ornaments in life. Children and wealth are nothing but ornaments. Are they beautiful? Yes, of course they're beautiful. Who doesn't want children? Who doesn't want wealth? But they're nothing but ornaments. They're very seductive. People nowadays worship their own children. They would crumble should anything happen to their own children, their own flesh and blood. But this is where faith comes in. And so it's not the shiny veneer of glittering towers and pearly white sand castles that we should be aspiring to. We're like nightingales marooned in this gilded cage. We cheaply traded our purpose in life for a phony world, for it's all the world's seductive ornaments. And for Muslims, we bartered that very cheaply for the invitation to jihad. Muslims nowadays in mosques and all over kinds of places. Oh, Ya Allah, save Afghanistan. Oh, Ya Allah, save people of Kashmir, people of Palestine, the Rohingya, etc., etc., etc. But they fail to do actions. They fail to do much of anything in the settler colony. We've forgotten and forgone Allah's pledge and promise that we, again, are nothing but traveling wayfarers, resting underneath the shade of the tree in this world, waiting to embark upon the real world, a real destination, to be a part of the ancestral world. And to those kinds of Muslims, Islam disowns you. Because for the fact that you are idle and you fancy slithering, twiddling your thumbs, while the Ummah's heads are rolling at your feet, well, then you be gone. Because the very reverence that Islam should add to your name, you've been dismissive of that. And for that, she evicts you. And may Allah's wrathful spikes of punishment find you, because you've domesticated your prayer prostrations, your quiet supplications, your silent tears, you're self-victimizing. Oh, what can I do? You're wallowing grievances that swell your eyes, despite the fact that you have agency, that you reject, that you push away. Because any of that will measure nothing, nothing next to Gaza's shattering wails, her desperation, her nightmare screams, her hunger, her starvation. You're self-victimizing. Your performative guilt is nothing but an act of self-conceit. This is the irony of blood that is cheaply spilt, mangled and mingled with tears, while the throat of our own ummah, our own people, while we're watching them starved and raped and pillaged and branded with stars of David that resemble swastikas. While we're seeing our own children, our own elderly murdered, eviscerated, evaporated through weapons so that they no longer exist. Entire lineages and families no longer exist in the context of this, let alone enslaved and taken as hostages in the context of Zionist prisons. Our cattle, our even the animals that we live in on our own land, our pastures, are destroyed. While we, those of us everywhere in the world, we've all felt Gaza, are capable of sleeping somehow. Our eyelids are capable of sleeping day and night. Oh, what weakness has come about to us as Muslims. Us as praise to foreign conquest and civil strife, civil discord. We beat and we bury each other. This is what has come of us. We have empowered the lowest within our ranks to represent us, be they totalitarian dictators, be they mayors of New York, the model good citizen Muslim subject who bows down to almighty, all high America, who toes the line instead of defending and being jealous and guarding our own tradition, our own religion. In the face of rabid and filthy legions of Roman cross crusaders and Star of David Zion, serpents that have sought to swallow and destroy and murder and take and steal every inch of our lives, every breath that we have, even our breath that acts and is a form of resistance, they seek to steal. In Islam, Jerusalem bears great bearing, like I said, for 1492, but also because it's the direction in which Muslims prayed. Every battle fought in her name, every gathering in support of her, every act of intimidation in order to free her is an act of jihad. And we should be preparing right now to crawl on our hands and knees if we must, to break these borders, those of us who live here, let alone those who are far away, to change the sour reality of her as well as all that she speaks to, of justice and injustice. Palestine will free us, but only in relationship to her historical, material, and spiritual and symbolic significance in relationship to 1492. And so when we say death to America, we mean, and loud and clear, a total end to US empire. The destruction of this crusading settler colony, her entire project, her capacity to meddle and intervene in other nations, to wage war, to engage in coups, to engage in interventions, to continue her ongoing genocide, for anti-Blackness, for anti-Indigenous founding and structure right here where we are. It means a reckoning. It means Indigenous sovereignty. It means Black self-determination. It means that we would be engaged in different ways of life according to Indigenous traditions and spiritualities and ways of living with the land and not on it. The land does not exist for us to conquer, for us to rule over. Again, we rely on the land, not the other way around. And so even these towers that we build to distance ourselves, the higher that we go, the Empire State Building, as if we desire to look down. I mean, this is the part of the vertical order, the world of the above, to look down on the land, to look down on the poor, to walk by a houseless person, a homeless person, and to pretend that they don't exist. We know, we feel the internalized shame, but we pretend that they don't exist. We can't deal with the trial, the conviction, the guilt. This is not about getting rid of an Epstein class. Again, this is about dealing with the structure and building an alternative to it, a new form of governance. Death to America means the end of this tyranny. It means the death of this evil regime, this evil entity, with all its contained and its ability to empower anybody else in its place. That means, again, building alternatives of the land, but it also means targeting. It's political, it's economic, it's social. Every single choke point, every single supply chain bottleneck that it has, disrupting by all means and all means necessary its internal and external genocide and imperialism. You have examples of whether underground, you have the Panthers, you have the Zapatistas. The Mujahideen planned Al-Aqsa flood over the course of 20 years. And I write, the Panthers did not rise just overnight. They established survival programs, like I said, the breakfast programs. And they earned themselves. They protected their own neighborhoods. Where is that? Look, white people own the land, they grow food, they feed the metropolis, and they're armed. That's the right. Where is the left in all that? Oh, right, they're sitting down and they're theorizing sovereignty. I see, I get it, as opposed to actually fighting where they are, as opposed to divesting from the academy. And we've all known as academics that the academy, as the state, is not a side of revolution, let alone reform. At best, it's reform. At best, it's a side of resistance, not liberation. That's it. We need to be divesting from the academy. We need to be walking away and building alternatives to it. And yet, people want to hang out and stick there and move away from the context of the US because of the heightened repression, because of the heightened totalitarianism. Listen, fascism was always part of it. Like I said, we've internalized fascism from the nation state as our father teaches us how to govern, to control others, to act in an authoritarian way, as well as capitalism, our mother, that teaches us to materialize everything. Valentine's Day, gay pride, all that Hallmark cards, Heineken advertisements, coming out cultures, all that. So we've internalized. What we're seeing now is totalitarianism exposed. Mr. Trump completely again removing any semblance or any veneer of ever there being a democracy. The courts don't stand in his way. Nothing stands in his way. And you got Gestapo night raids that that extend back to Obama, who engaged in these raids and eviction of over 2 million immigrants. So again, this is nothing new. ICE. This is just a continued manifestation. They all pave the way for each other. So the Green Party, this party, that party, Revolutionary Party won't make a difference. The structure is a structure. Jill Stein won't make much of a difference. The Zapatistas planned for over a decade before they declared war on the Mexican state, the settler Mexican state, in 1994, divest. You need to alter the real material conditions of resistance. What, did you think that this was going to be easy, that you weren't going to be tested? You need to be able to sacrifice more than you can share. Having lived up here, what, you think that the revolution doesn't involve people dying? We're already dying. The question is, how do you choose to die? How do we choose to die? As slaves or standing on our feet? To die for the promise of joining our ancestors with honor, or with shame? Of perhaps providing a different world for our children, the children of strangers, the children of people that we love, even the children of our enemies. Children are children until, again, they're indoctrinated into monstrosities. But then that is what transforming the environment is. Move beyond the bubble. that is Virginia Tech and otherwise, need to be dealing with, well, you may not have the refugee camp, but you do have the reserves. You do have the gentrified neighborhoods, the villages, the prison cells. We're taking up influencers as our leaders and as our elders and engaging in the same tactics over and over. The flotilla that's going to break a siege. Now the flotilla is being stopped hundreds of kilometers from Gaza, over at Crete. They're not even, we were better off like a few months ago than we are now. We never even broke the siege a few months ago. But this is the fantasy. Look at the hundreds of thousands of millions of dollars that are invested in a tactic that hasn't achieved anything since the 2000s, the early 2000s, mid 2000s. What have we achieved? Where's the centering of our prisoners as the backbone? Because to the Mujahideen, that is the center, that is the backbone. This is what becomes important, you see. I'm going to continue for another few minutes. I know now I've crossed I'm at the hour mark, if you don't mind, but I'll continue on. Because I want to talk a little bit first about America, and then I want to talk about the axis of resistance a little bit in conclusion. So I'll try and stick to another 20 minutes, inshallah, 25 tops. I want to be very clear again, if it isn't, with regards to what we're talking about here and why it needs to be destroyed. Right? If there's any illusion, this is the irredeemable cowboy and Indian America. Okay. This is the America that bombed Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the only entity in the world that engaged and fired nuclear weapons. It is the America of Vietnam, Cambodia, Afghanistan, Libya, Syria, Palestine, Lebanon, Yemen, Iran, that has invaded 84 of 194 nations that are recognized by its pocketed UN. It is the one that created these nations, this divide and conquer, this project of 1492, that resulted in Sykes-Picot. It is the one that split the world the way that it did. This is not Israel that did it. This is the entity you all live that did this. This is the entity with 750 bases in over 80 lands that never spared people across the entire globe over its 533 years. This is the one with its regime change impulse, the one that is led by and continues insofar as Jim Crow, insofar as afterlife to slavery projects, stand your ground laws, school to prison, nexus and pipelines. This is the one of CIA coups. This is the bacterium that gave the 1830s Indian Removal Act, the 1923 Chinese Exclusion Act, the 1932 to 1972 Tuskegee trials, the 1942 Japanese internment camps, the goddamn America, with her NRA trigger-happy slave-catching police forces. This is the one that needs to be destroyed. This is the infection parasite. This is the so-called post-racial America, with her mass shooting horrors in schools, in cinemas, in public theaters, in workplaces, in houses of worship, and shopping malls. This is the one that manufactured Osama bin Laden, who gave him the code name Geronimo. This is the diseased America that designated Iraqi areas in its occupied green zones as Indian territory. This is what we're talking about here. This is the one that uses you and will use you and will use your children and your children's children to murder each other where you're at, or to murder people elsewhere. And for that, may it burn with the most volatile kerosene, may it combust and be erased from the history of this world, of this planet, and the most fiery of flames. This is what we're contending with. This is what we're contending with. This America, you need to know the history of where you're living, because this America's bloodlust has no end. The biological warfare that it has engaged in against indigenous people, the way that it has severed their mother tongues and their relationship to the land, I don't understand for the life of me how anyone could seek that this project continue. The way that it has used its own people, or people that it claimed ownership over, as medical test subjects. And the anniversary, it's 250, is coming, in which people will be celebrating vis-a-vis picnics and barbecues and cookouts and cold beers and concerts, as opposed to taking action. This is the America that scalped, that put bounties on indigenous people's heads, whose cavalry troops just revolved into police shootings and a police force. This is the America that you have a women's march with pink hats surrounded by trigger happy cops. This is the America that a few years ago, at the height of the pandemic, we were talking about the Black Spring. What are there no Trayvon Martins and Michael Browns and George Floyds and Breonna Taylors? There are no Black murders. There's no Black genocide that is still ongoing. Long live the Battle of Little Bighorn. Long live the dance of our brave Lakota, the Northern Cheyenne, the Arapaho elder warriors who vanquished Custer. This is the real kind of warriorhood that needs to be embraced by this generation, because we're so far away from what was happening in the 50s and the 60s and the 70s. We're so far away from our radical Black traditions and what is necessary for the amelioration of our own people. We're so far away from Nat Turner, from George Jackson. And we need to confront that reality. For those of us who are immigrant settlers, I repeat again, you never belonged here and you will never fit. You are a guest on stolen land. Contend with that. And for you Muslims, and for history, Islamophobia is a cornerstone of America's domestic and foreign policy. For those who would complain about anti-Semitism, anti-Semitism is not institutionalized. I don't see, with all due respect, I don't see the CIA and the FBI spying on synagogues. I see them spying on mosques. I see them raiding Muslim homes. I see them kidnapping us, not you, Jews. I see extraordinary renditions for us Muslims, not you, Jews. I don't see Abu Ghraib and Guantanamo, in which you are sexually raped, for you, Jews. Black sites for you, Jews. I see them for us, Muslims. I don't see state legislators being obsessed with halakhic law. They're obsessed with so-called Sharia law that isn't even a monolith. Because all Sharia law is the corpus of all Muslim adjudications and jurisprudence that has happened over 1,446 years. It is the compilation of any adjudication, any religious adjudication that happened in any case over the course of over the course of 1,446 years. This is the degree of ignorance that we have reached, that exists in the world. You know, America raised the question of how do we Christianize that slave population? And between 1790 and 1952, it went and established the Naturalization Act of 1790 that mandated that whiteness was a prerequisite for citizenship. That means you had to profess tolerance and acceptance, and as an immigrant, and you have to prove the fact that you were religiously white as well as racially white. That included even non-white Christians from Egypt, from the Levant, Chalidians, Assyrians from Iraq, Moroccan Jews, all were cast under the umbrella Muslims, because Muslim is the boogeyman term. This is why indigenous land defenders of North Dakota would be referred to as jihadi terrorists. Muslim is the umbrella term. This is why I said the new world is built in the image of the old. But all are and continue to be required to prove that they are white religiously as well as racially. This is the America that needs to be destroyed. So far as the axis of resistance, I want to talk very briefly insofar as how I'm glad that finally Iran has realized, as well as Hezbollah, that this is an existential war. I wish that they had realized this on October 8th. We would not be where we are at now. I'm deeply saddened at our with regard to our martyrs in Lebanon, with regards to our martyrs in Iran, with regards to our martyrs everywhere, but particularly within the region of Asia that is, and everything that is unfolding, and how Islam is the tip of the spear and fighting imperialism and fighting settler colonialism. We have to understand that for a long time, at least from a theological perspective, and this stretches a very long time, that there has been a spectrum of debate within political Muslim thought, because I don't buy into this term Islamism. Islamism is an Orientalist term that was developed during the heart of Enlightenment and exists in French and Oxford dictionaries and British dictionaries stretching back hundreds of years, 13th, 14th, 15th century type stuff, right? In which the European white man had depicted or perceived in their Orientalism that Islam was distinct from Christianity in two ways. Number one, that they perceived in their stupidity that Prophet Muhammad was in the place of Jesus. No, Prophet Muhammad is nothing but a prophet. They are not in the status of Jesus insofar as white Christianity is concerned. And the second is that they were very much attuned that it is impossible to separate politics from religion in the context of Islam. But arguably, that is the case with regards to any idea that exists, even within the context of Christianity. Or did Jesus not defend Mary Magdalene? And did Jesus not flip the table inside the temple at the site of interest being charged as an exploitation of the poor? Any faith, any spirituality relies on political commitments. It's just a question of what those political commitments are and underlying understanding and an extraction of them. But anyways, there's a spectrum of political Muslim thought, particularly since and before colonization. This is a question that exists for a long time, and has existed for a long time, and that has led to a spectrum of what is referred to as Islamism. And we're going to go back to Hassan al-Banna, who founded the Muslim Brotherhood in 1929, to people like Sayyid Qutb, Fazl al-Rahman, to al-Mawdudi, Iqbal, Mawardi. There are so many. Al-Mawardi, sorry. About the question of how can one achieve the Ummah? Because as I said, there has been a question, particularly since colonialism, how do we achieve Ummah and anti-statist world? Not only a world for Muslims, but a world for all believers, because the emphasis in the Quran is on creating a world where all worlds fit. This is what our Mujahideen in Gaza fight for, a world where all worlds fit. The word Muslim only appears 5 or 6 times in the Quran. The emphasis is on the word believer. Ya ayyuhal mu'minina wal mu'minat. O believers. What is the quality and what are the specifications or characteristics of a believer? The one who does not corrupt in the earth, the one who minds the rights of the orphan, the poor, the elderly, women, children, etc., to dispossess the meek of the earth. So we begin to develop a new cosmology, a new ontology, a new epistemology, a new characteristic of what is a believer. That's how you get that there are certain Muslims that aren't Muslims because they embody Zionist commitments. And there are plenty of those. There are indigenous people who are Zionists, there are black people who are Zionists. That doesn't make them a part of the Ummah. There are black, red, and brown-skinned folks with white masks. This is why I say that if you're a Muslim and you don't care about the fact that you're living on stolen land, what kind of Islam are you really practicing? But there's a spectrum then of ethical political thought that comes up, how do we achieve this? And particularly with colonialism that introduced a world of 1492, that introduced the world of the above, a world of nation states and capitalism. And some believe that that the state could be an instrument of liberation. This is sort of where also leftist Marxist thought comes in, right? And there are many debates, like I said, from Muhammad Rashid Rida, Ibn Qayyim. This goes even back to the 13th century, even, right? And the 1400s and the 1200s. Like, what is the form of Muslim political governance, and how do we enact it in the world? Sovereignty, the question of sovereignty, from a theological perspective, from a practical perspective. And with the revolutionary project in Iran in 1979, that was an anti-colonial movement, absolutely, an anti-imperial movement, absolutely, that started with Khomeini to remove the Shah, who was empowered, him and the Savah, who were empowered by the Zionists and by the Americans after they overthrew a leftist, nationalist, Mohammad Mossadegh, in 1953, who nationalized the oil. So look at what we're dealing with. And so comes about Khomeini and the Iranian Revolution. But we have to understand then, even with a revolutionary movement, what the state does. and with Khomeini's idea of Wilayat al-Faqih, the Council of the Jurists, because the state takes power. In Islam, there's always been an understanding that power is fluid, it's dynamic. There are anti-authoritarian, non-authoritarian concepts of shura, mutual consultation, ijma', community consensus, maslaha, public welfare. There's the concept of khulafa. We're all caretakers of one another of the land. There's no central authority or central church within Islam. There's the concept of tawheed. One worships only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. One does not pledge allegiance to a state or to a nation or to a tribe or to a community or to their blood or to their race. Loyalty is strictly to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The manifestation of Allah's complete sovereignty on this earth is in the context of the ummah. And that is guided if people engage in shura and ijma' and maslaha and tawheed and see themselves as khulafa, then they conduct their day-to-day affairs via these non-authoritarian, non-authoritarian daily practices that create a new form of subjectivity, a new kind of revolutionary being, one who doesn't want to subscribe to the world of the above or to one up the other. What the state does, because it's a product of the white man as a form of government, it's inherently powerful, it's inherently vertical. No matter how well-intentioned the revolutionary movement that takes over the state wants to use it as an instrument of liberation, it will always fall short. Because the function of the state is to make power static, to create a vanguard class in the name of a revolution. And now we are seeing this wonderful understanding and conceptualization by Hezbollah that, oh, you can't maintain your loyalty to the Lebanese state while being loyal to the project of the Ummah. You can't. The state was never meant to be able to provide for that. This is why these are manifestations of, in the case of Iran, Islam of the above and to the left, an anti-imperialist and anti-colonial Islam, but that was always going to hit a wall. Because it still had to subscribe to international law and human rights. It had to still sit on the table with the Americans. It has to still have a seat in the UN. That's part of the world of the above, of the world of 1492, the world of the white man. It had to always subscribe on some level to those guiding general accepted rules, on some level, bureaucratic level, political level, economic level. Even when it's being suffocated under sanctions, which are a form of siege and a form of death. And it has sacrificed enough, and it has supported, yes, the Mujahideen in Gaza, but the Mujahideen in Gaza also were still sustainable. They created their own weapons. They were the ones that dug their own tunnels. There's much that allowed them to sustain 3 years of genocide on their own, without real much support from the rest of the Axis, say from Ansarullah. Hezbollah was part of the below, but also part of the above, because it was trying to maintain unity within the Lebanese state that was very diverse, as with the case of Iran. But it could maintain loyalty because the Lebanese state, as the Jordanian state, as the Iraqi state, as all these states are constructs of and are products of Sykes-Picot, of colonialism and imperialism. The master's tools can never dismantle the master's house, as Audre Lorde would say. So now they're discovering the limitations of that world of the above. And by the way, a movement can start of the below, become a part of the above, then shift back to the below. It's a dynamic process. It's not something that's static. As soon as you leave the colonizer's world, you abandon their tools and you put everything on the line as a revolutionary subjectivity. And this is why, again, Islam of the above in the case of Iran, and that is anti-imperial, that is anti-colonial, and to the left, of course, you have the Islam of the above, and to the right, you have Turkey that is okay with capitalism. You have the Arab Gulf Peninsula countries that are okay with capitalism, the Arab normalizing regimes, Egypt, and so on and so forth. So you have the above and to the right. And you have the below and to the right, like ISIS, like Al-Qaeda, that were empowered by the Americans, that were used to murder Muslims. In the context of Iraq, in the context of Syria. And you have the Islam of the below and to the left, like Ansarullah, like the Mujahideen, that are horizontalist, that don't seek, like I said, a Yemeni state or a Palestinian state or any of that. That's a different orientation. This is and becomes important into terms of the type of organizing you as students, you as human beings will engage in. Ansar Allah, for instance, it becomes very important to realize, because they state this, is not an organization, they're an ummah. They're not organized as some hierarchical organization. And yeah, that involves a lot of work. Sitting down, getting to know one another, overcoming each other's insecurities, getting to know one another. They don't have registration lists and cards, etc. They don't have conference halls and rooms that they sit down, and memberships that they're a part of, and fees that they pay to be a part of this committee or that committee. There are people that are organized according to their own political consciousness, that is, and relies on their own dedication to their own ijtihad and their own jihad, their own involvement, their own honesty, because they are part of the revolutionary process. They're not external to it. And they draw on the Quran as the Mujahideen in Gaza. That is the type of organizing that we can learn from the Mujahideen in Gaza, that act as the tip of the spear from Ansar Allah, from the moment that we are in. And it's more effective in terms of, again, destroying America and building an alternative to it. From a security perspective, from an anti-authoritarian, non-authoritarian perspective, from an anti-hegemonic perspective. I hope, and let me conclude, that this talk has been useful, that it has benefited. I hope that it helps to contextualize the severity, the moment of urgency and emergency in which we live. We always say, and I learned from our elders, somebody like Ashanti Alston, former member of the BLA, Black Liberation Army, who spent a great deal of time, a great deal of his life in solitary confinement in prison. This is why our elders said, all power to the people. If all power is to the people, then it needs to be acted on that way in terms of the sovereignty of the people. It's beautiful to see the example of the Iranian people take charge of their own fate, to want this war to continue, because this war will continue. The question is, where we are all at locally, how will it contribute to this forefront? Because the battlefront is everywhere, and because the apocalypse has already happened, whether we realize it or not. We all need to rise to the occasion. We have not sacrificed enough. We can never do enough. Everything is at stake. The earth is at stake, not just Jerusalem. Everything that Jerusalem stands for, everything that Al-Quds stands for. Or otherwise we will lose everything. And we need to be smart. We need to organize ourselves as cells. There's much to this conversation that needs to manifest. But I hope perhaps that it ushers a beginning. I'm very grateful again for this opportunity, for this invitation, for hospitality. I wish I was there in person, physically. I am with you in heart and spirit and mind and soul. I am always at your service, so long as there is breath in me. And when our general threw that stick, the child in me dreams that it was for me. And on my best days, I think so. But true that I have reached a certain age in my mid-40s now, that perhaps the role that I play might be different. But that stick is really meant for you, the youth. You are the flowers from the seeds that they planted. You are the ones who will be the new blades of grass to replace the old that has died. This general was very true to his word. He said, if they want to transform this into a religious war, then it will be a war that will burn the green and the brown. And he has been true to his word. This world will never be the same. And why should it be? This world needs to be end. And what we're living are the birth pangs of the new. Let us embrace it. Let us act wisely, intelligently. Let us organize. Let us learn and move past the 50s and 60s and 70s, because we do have our ancestors, but that doesn't mean that they got everything right. The Third World Movement, the Bandung conferences, that still relied on the world of the above, the Pan-Africanism and Pan-Arabism that strictly dealt with the racial question, not with the religious and spiritual question as adequately as it should be. That didn't deal with anti-statist forms of sovereignty, non-statist forms of sovereignty as should be. Needs to be engaged and taken seriously. This is then the only benefit of Black anarchisms and indigenous anarchisms and Muslim anarchisms and anarchisms generally as a trajectory. Again, not to dismiss Marxism. Marxism is a beautiful tradition, and anarchists are Marxists too. But no single idea can resolve and has the answers to all the injustices that exist in the world. And it would be very insulting for us, even as Black indigenous people of color, to strictly rely even on Marxism or even anarchism as they emerged as political philosophies, as economic and social analyses of the world as historical material lenses from which you know the world without looking to our own traditions, our own way of being, to alternative forms of sovereignty, to a world that existed prior to your American colonialism and imperialism and nation states and capitalism is very insulting. So we can learn, but the left has much to learn too. And Muslim Marxists, Muslim anarchists, all kinds of people have much to learn from each other's traditions because of the way that we exclude one another. I'm sorry, you can't be simply a Muslim Marxist on Turtle Island or even a Muslim anarchist on Turtle Island without dealing with your own set of colonialism and you're sitting down and talking about anti-imperialism. There's an element of condescension there, and there's a lie that this needs to be outed. So we need to face the monsters in the mirror that lies within our own selves, and we need to sacrifice what may be. Again, thank you so much for this opportunity. Barakallah feekum, jazakumullah khair. Forgive me for my shortcomings, and I look forward, inshallah, to your questions. And sorry that I prolonged so much of the talk, because certainly Q&As are very valuable and important to me as well. Hopefully, inshallah, we'll expand based on a few questions that I'll take from you all. If you have some. Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you very much, Dr. Abdou, for just like the whole gambit of it, because you did hit on like everything for real. Some of the questions that were asked prior to, you answered them in your talk. So I wanted to kind of dive into two of them. One is one that I think encapsulates the broader trend of these different questions, and it was, if the goal is destroying from within, then what is the ultimate goal for the society to look like? Or like just generally, I suppose, maybe even connecting that to how what a decolonial objective looks like in relation to the project of uniting the Ummah and letting it express from below. But yeah.
That's a very important question. The problem with historical materialism, with Marxism, with anarchism, again, broadly, with revolutionaries nowadays, I mean, again, this is where we learn a lot from the Mujahideen in Gaza. They're the most beautiful people on earth, and if we just reflect, if we take a moment, if we seek to really pay respect to them, we would be wise to study them. They teach me so much every single day, and I fall in love with them more and more by the second. But to get to the question, again, our mujahideen are people of belief. And in Islam, there is the concept of al-ghayb, and I talk about that in my work in Islam and anarchism, or just generally speaking. Who says that we have to have everything figured out prior to an uprising or revolution? We didn't plan Tahrir Square. Sure, we need to plan certain things. The Panthers had to have survival programs. They had to have some semblance of tactics, of strategy, of plan. Same thing with the Zapatistas. Same thing with, again, the Mujahideen. But the Mujahideen also relied on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's how much faith they had. They said, we're going to do our part, and what will be, will be. We're going to kill this world of mediocrity, this world where you're all trying to bandage. We're going to take that mirror of 1492, we're going to smash it on the floor, and you all, everybody in this world, will have to look at the shards of the broken glass and face the jagged edges and the monstrosities of your own selves. And you have to figure out what you're going to do now, because you're not going to be able to piece that mirror together. So who said that we have to have everything figured out in terms of an objective? Because that would deny that, okay, Allah or the spirit world or our Mother Earth has something to teach us with regards to our own petty existence in this world. The land doesn't have something to teach us. The animal nations and kingdoms, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes and says, we created you from tribes and nations so that you may get to know one another. And the best amongst you are those that exercise piety. And what is piety? That relies on spiritual anchoring and social justice, ethical, political commitments of social justice. Okay, but the animals, the plants, are nations unto themselves too. And we're not going back to 1492. So the land has changed. Even indigenous people have to know the land. Black people, everybody has to re-know the land. There are invasive species that have been introduced to the land. There's purple leaf loosestrife. That wasn't a vegetation that existed. A plant that existed in the context of Turtle Island. Okay, so we need to relearn plant medicine, everything. All right. How do we do that? How do you do that without the land? Without the land guiding you? Without indigenous people who perhaps know the land better than us that don't know, or people that don't know the land, that are urbanized. So this is what becomes important: how to make textures, how to make everything. To learn about the three sisters. Like this is what it's about: a reciprocal and a set of reciprocal relationships. But you can't do that while you're sitting down and we're sitting down and just doing theory. Theory is a form of liberatory praxis, but there's the liberatory praxis that comes about with it. You can sit down and theorize Iran and the axis of resistance and the sovereignty of Karbala all you want. There is no such thing as sovereignty of Karbala, because that's just a made-up phrase. Sovereignty lies in the context of the The theology in Islam is very clear. We don't need to invent terms where they are unnecessary. But we do need to live what we practice and what we preach, and we need to live on the land. So there are things that we learned from the experiments that our ancestors went through. We have learned certain things. So what we need to decide on is who is the enemy and what are we fighting for. So are we still going to buy into we're going to take over the United States? Are we going to still buy into electoralism, into professional sort of like political specter of U.S. settler colonialism and voter participation? Despite the district remapping, despite all the influence by dark money, like all that we're still going to pretend that we're a democracy? Or are we going to start organizing on the ground with indigenous people, with our Black siblings in gentrified neighborhoods? Because again, the single trans mother, I always give this example with 2 kids, working 3 jobs. She may well very much believe in our struggle and free Palestine, free Turtle Island, but the first question she's going to say, as the question Tahrir, where are you going to feed my kids? How am I going to pay my rent, or where am I going to live? In Tahrir, we took care of each other for 18 days. We didn't expect, again, nobody plans revolutions, but we need to be prepared for it. Physically, emotionally, mentally. We need to be prepared and conditioned to engage in the greater jihad, which never ends. Because if I accept the fact that I'm going to live, breathe, eat differently, conceive of what's private and public differently, learn to be called out, learn how to disagree with others vis-a-vis ethics of disagreements, because in Islam that exists, whether it's practiced or not is a different issue, but it's called usul al-ikhtilaf in Islam. How do we disagree ethically? And what are the reasons by which we disagree? And I wrote about that. Part of it is ego, part of it is ignorance. There are many reasons for which we disagree. Arrogance, there's lots of reasons, but there's an ethics nonetheless, let alone a politics of hospitality. Because we have cultures of hospitality. We can sit down and engage in a disagreement, let alone get to know one another just as passing by. I mean, from Frosh Week, you remember I was an undergraduate once. It's like you meet people on the street on campus. She's like, hey, what's your name? What are you studying? Where are you from? It's just like, as if, and I remember this, being at my white university, it's just like if I said I'm from Mozambique, would most people, white people in particular, even know where to place that on the map of the world? Of course not. But just like, oh, okay, it's sort of a way to gauge. Oh, that's nice. Okay, I know your name. I know where you're at. I know where to start you. I don't need to know you anymore. So it's that degree of day-to-day investment that is required, and the building of community. And the fact that even we may refer to ourselves, oh, well, our anarchists were this or that. That isn't a guarantee that we're going to establish community. because we're going to have pet peeves. This is where, again, the Mujahideen teach. Do the Mujahideen have disagreements with one another in Gaza? Yeah, of course. They have different characters. They have different temperaments. As with the original polity of the prophets, as with the disciples of Jesus, as with any community. But they learn to become, as the prophet said, as Islam teaches, as one ummah. If a part of your finger is pricked, the rest of your body feels it. As one unison body, we learn to complement one another because we belong now to a higher purpose. So it isn't according to our whims. It isn't according to what I want over and above the community. No, the community supersedes. But I need to formulate a community. And maybe my way of life and my lifestyle is not conducive to the majority of people within the community. So we need to talk about that. We need to get to know that. We need to evolve. I need to change. And other members of the community need to in other ways. So this is hard work. And this is why it's so easy for a lot of people to be like, oh, let me go for voting. Oh, let me pretend that I'm going to revolutionary take over the state. It's just like, we're so far away from the 50s and 60s and 70s and what was going on down there. And yeah, they were taking over states, but they started off as revolutionary movements. But even that didn't lead anywhere. Pan-Africanism reached a dead end. Where's it now? Pan-Arabism reached a dead end. Where's it now? So that involves a new formulation of a completely different strategy. And the Mujahideen show a light. They are modern prophets that way. They show an example how you can do that. So how to build underground, how to organize. You know, the day before, or the eve of the Blessed Tufan al-Aqsa, I'll say two things, and because I'm sure there are other questions, although I'll stay as long as you want me. The eve of Tufan al-Aqsa, General Sinwar rallied all the Mujahideen from the various different factions, let alone the various different tribes, the various different elders. And you know what he was talking to them about? The meetings that he was having with the Egyptians and the Qataris and the intelligence agencies and that and that. And what he was saying, oh, we're talking to them about development projects, how we're going to get water filtrations, how we're going to get more solar panels, how we're going to get Palestinian workers to have more access to this territory, to that territory. Tufan al-Aqsa was happening 6 a.m. in the morning. Fajr, morning prayers, the Mujahideen were being called to their local mosques without each knowing what the other is going to do or what was unfolding that day. This is the degree to which it was so secret. He gave the illusion even to people within Hamas, to those closest to him, let alone the political leadership, let alone to the enemy, that everything was fine, everything was normal, nothing was changing. The parachute gliders. Al-Qassam established a shell company. I wrote about this. I was the first one to break. And when I heard the story, it was the most incredible thing. They made a shell company. And they were selling it based on the prospect that, hey, people in Gaza, you don't get to fly. You don't get to leave this concentration camp. You're besieged by air, land, and sea. So you can learn how to fly, parachute glide. But as soon as they got the trainers, as soon as they got the equipment, they raised the price. And they would close the beach in Gaza so that the Mujahideen would practice their paragliding. Other Mujahideen from other factions started to take notice. It's just like, yo, what are you all doing? And so they took permission from the central leadership. Can we get them to just practice? We won't tell them. And instead, they would open Salahuddin Road, which is now completely destroyed, is with all of Gaza for the majority of Palestinians. What are we talking about here? Did the Mujahideen know everything? No, but they planned and they had full conviction. That's it. We're done. We're not done. We're done with half measures. We're not going to live the fantasy of liberation. We're going to seek it. We're not just going to engage in resistance. We're going to seek liberation. We're not just going to talk about surviving. We're going to thrive. Thrive. And if that means you're going to have to annihilate every single each one of us, destroy every building, destroy every inch of land as you have, so be it. We're condemned to death anyways. We're living dead. At least we get to choose the manner of our martyrdom this way. and we show as an example to the world that we are the most defiant people on earth, and against all odds, with nothing, we dug 1,200 kilometers of tunnels, not with Caterpillar bulldozers, with their own hands, their own fingernails, rudimentary shovels. 600 kilometers during the genocide. What power is that? And yet we're talking about the wealthiest nation on earth, and we're talking about movements that, by all measure, are much more well endowed. How many billions of dollars came out of the Black Spring? To academics, to movements, to organizers, billions, hundreds of millions invested. More Black hires, more Black studies, expand this, expand that. Let's paint a road in DC with Black Lives Matter. That road doesn't even exist anymore. People who know and are uncompromising with regards to liberation are uncompromising, and they find a means and a way in with. So we don't need to know everything. We just need to know and study what our mujahideen did. And we need to start. We need to start soon. And we need to also rely on people who actually have the grassroots experience. Sadly, part of the crisis is the fact that people are relying on influencers, on people that have never gone their hands dirty, not in organizing, nor even have a theory. People that are sitting down and talking about how AIPAC is controlling America and how we need to free America and Britain from Israel. The discourse is so low. It's so bad. We don't even know. We're spinning around. The answers are there. They're right in front of our eyes. The people that get it are in the fringes of the fringes, and they don't have tons of thousands of followers, and yeah, they're gay-capped as hell, and yeah, there's much that can be said about that, but the concept of the ghaib is very important. But let's start and let Allah lead the way. But that liberation is not, that vision is certainly not going to come from the Arabic terror. Hence, death to America and death to the Academy. So yeah, divest from that space. And I'll say just this one thing to you all, because I didn't say it and I'm sorry. My answer is long. You all that experience encampment, you have an obligation, you have a responsibility. I said you were referred to as the branch of the resistance. You don't get to walk away so easily. I don't get to walk away. This is why we're doing this together. You have a responsibility to the youth, to the kids that are younger than you, to your siblings that are younger than you, that came to this institution looking and being inspired by what you did during the encampments. And even if you're expelled, even if you graduated, no matter what it is, you don't get to walk away. They were looking up to you, not to me. They were more so looking up to you. You don't get to walk away. You have to act as their guide. You have to funnel them out. You have to tell them the truth. You have to tell them that, yeah, this course is a dead end. But what you should be doing within the space is XYZ. Resisting, destroying, disrupting. We're so far away from where the encampments were 2 years ago. And you can't repeat that tactic again. It's over. You can't have two Tahrir squares. Come on. What, you think you're our masters? We would pull off two events like this twice? No. So yeah, we're not even at the stage where people are chaining themselves to the footsteps of a abusive parent called Columbia University. People aren't even doing that. People are having bake sales, for God's sake. It's just like, where are we at? And our people are still being genocided. So there's, again, I know I prolonged, but we don't need to know everything. We already know enough to take action. Locally, collectively, in terms of destroying and in terms of building. Because Kwame said, our elder said, a revolutionary that talks about destroy, without providing a vision for what to build isn't much of a revolutionary. We're out to build too a world for tomorrow. But it can't be just built on our own terms. It has to be built with indigenous people at the center. In the context of Turtle Island, at least it needs to be. So yeah, stop there.
Definitely appreciate that. I'm actually gonna make this the last question that's on the recording. And this is like more so like, I guess more of a personal one. what is your favorite saying of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam? And why is that? And how do you feel like that relates to our moment right now?
Favorite quote? Oh my God, you got me speechless. My beloved sibling. My favorite quote by the Prophet, alayhi salatu wassalam. I gotta look that one up. If you want to give me a second, I gotta look that one up because there's one that I particularly love. Um, uh, there's one that I particularly love to share with you all, and I think it's a very beautiful one. Uh, and it shows and testifies to his faith. Here it is. Much longer than this one. Sorry, this one was only a small part of it. Well, this is the smaller abbreviated, but it was much longer than this. Uh, just one moment. I don't know why the full one is not showing. Sorry, see? It made me stumble, but that's okay. It was do not abandon me to do not abandon me to my weakness, and do not abandon me to enemies who would ravage and pillage me, who would prevent me from your worship, and warring against those who would carry enmity towards me or to my people. And I think it's a beautiful prayer because, number one, the Prophet used to always say that if the entire world gathered in order to cause harm to me, and Allah did not will it, they would not be able to do so. And if the whole world gathered to benefit somebody, and Allah did not will it, they would not be able to do so. Then take the General Sanwar. Take any of the Mujahideen. Take Muhammad Abdou. Do you know how many assassination attempts that were attempted against the ghost of Abdou? 8 to 9. 8 to 9 attempts. He was only murdered or assassinated when he was betrayed. And of course, that happens. But it's a very difficult thing because of unmatched forces that exist in the context of Gaza and with regards to Hamas in particular, and so on and so forth. Because they're really good and they're not organized as a state. So that makes infiltration far more difficult. And being betrayed far more difficult. This is one of the benefits of organizing horizontally when you really get to know and when you invest in one another. General Sanwar, they found him by accident. In order to kill Abu Ubaidah, they have to kill his own family and tens of others with him. That's the only way they can reach us. So, but having faith, they're not going to reach you if Allah doesn't will it. And then the moment that Allah wills, that's when it will happen. Not before, and not nobody takes more than their share in this world of health, of children, of wealth. Nobody. We are only that's the degree of humility that one should have. That's the degree of which, again, we should be praying to Allah. Our faith is on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's not again in some state. It's not in some vanguardist movement that is going to save the world. Even though Muslims believe in the return of Isa and the Mahdi, who's part of the Prophet's family, we know that we should continue to strive, that we should continue to do jihad. I mean, if you know that Isa is coming back and the Mahdi is going to come, and the Mahdi and Jesus are not going to take over some states in order to create the Ummah, it's not the way it's going to happen. This is the irony behind, again, this revolutionary, oh, let's take over the state, this secularized lens, even this religious Marxist or leftist lens that ignores. It's just like, well, wait a second. Like, even from prophetic perspective, like a state is not going to be taken over by Jesus or the Mahdi. So wouldn't be considering another form of revolutionary organizing to be able to join them when they are ready or when they appear. But yeah, we should be preparing uh, for their arrival, and we should be waiting. That's not the way that it works. So yeah, that's one of my couple of my favorite. I think I mentioned a couple. But yeah, our Mujahideen teach us much. Abdef, nobody knew his real face. Nobody knew what he looked like. Not even the Zionists, not even the American entity, not with their Azure programs, their AI, their Amazon, all their technologies that mines and harvests, the data regulates and transforms us into algorithms of data points. They weren't able to determine until again after his martyrdom. He would sit down and spend the night each day in a different home in Gaza, out of protection of his own family, out of protection for his own identity. He would donate half his salary towards women and children that were stricken by cancer. Kids would meet him on the streets and he would hand them toys that he made. This is the kind of things people don't want. Accolades. They don't want people to clap to them. They don't want awards for a bestseller book that they think is going to change the world. These people, as the prophet, you know what the Ummah of Muhammad is referred to as the Ummah of illiterate, of the illiterate, because he was an illiterate man. That is his miracle. But the first thing that he was told by the angel Gabriel is read, then read, then read. Read in the name of Allah that created. He didn't tell Prophet Muhammad just read this or just read that. Even read the works and the views of people that you disagree with. You can know, what are you against? What are you for? Don't just say I'm against Hitler. Understand, what does Hitler stand for? You've got a modern Zionist entity that manifests a Hitlerite mentality, that want to proclaim themselves as victims, despite the fact that they're whites and nobody would be able to tell the fact that they're Jewish on the streets of whatever, unless they're wearing a yarmulke or whatever else. It's just like, you're white. You walk. I couldn't tell that you're Jewish. Meanwhile, a person of color, can I change my color of skin? I can't. Well, right, I forgot you made skin bleaching creams for us to change our shade and color of skin. This is a degree of self-resentment and hate. But still, my name on a passport, my name in anything will identify me as Muslim. I'm never fed into the white man's. But yeah, some of us are condemned to the way that we are. So, but yeah, the person that likes to play victim is this is the irony of the moment that we live in. Yet we're the terrorists, we're the monsters, we're the human animals. How ironic. From a savage heathen to human animals. Wait, 533 years, we haven't moved much on that scale. So let us have dignity as Black, Indigenous, and people of color. Let us have dignity as Muslims. For God's sake and for the sake of Allah, for the sake of this ummah. This ummah, again, and let me repeat, not for Muslims. Not for Muslims. For all believers. This is about building a world where all worlds fit. We also know how to love. And we war and we fight, and we fight with honor. And we have a code of honor, even with prisoners. But we do it out of love. Love for Allah and love for the justice that Allah stands for. We don't do things out of vengeance. We don't do things out of hate. We don't do things out of vindictiveness or to get back at people because somebody did injustice towards us. That's not how it works. It's not what we're fighting. Again, thank you so much. And I'm very, very honored and deeply grateful for this opportunity. I'm at your service. Please, any of you, the students, know that I hold you on top of my head, that I'm at your service. And if there's anything I could do to be of service, I'm here for you all. And God bless you for pulling this event despite the blood and soil white supremacist crusaders and the Zionists, but yeah, what can I say? MashaAllah. You're a brilliant group. And yeah.
MashaAllah. Thank you very much. And thanks everybody, well, the friendly ones who joined online, the enemies, thanks not so much, especially if, anyway. So I don't know if we can kick everybody off. That sounds a little crazy, but kick everybody off now.
Recording has stopped.
And yeah, then we can go ahead and close out. But yeah, I don't know how to do it personally, so I need somebody else to do it, please.
Thank you again. Assalamu alaikum.